Welcome, Patreon members. I'm your host, Heather Sumlin, and today I have Andromeda Peters. You were Miss United States how long ago?
2018. I don't know how long ago that was, but 2018.
Oh my goodness. Why don't you tell everybody a little more about you?
Yes, well, nice to meet all of you. I'm really excited to be here. As Heather was saying, I won Miss United States back in 2018 with the help of she herself. And I'm also a life coach and licensed psychotherapist, also still modeling part-time, still doing that because it's fun. And I really love to kind of bring in the things that I do for myself, like in the mindfulness arena, to my clients and also to people on social media, sharing different mental health tips that can hopefully help people.
So, how did you get into therapy?
It's a good question. I feel like my upbringing got me into therapy, not in the sense of like why I went to therapy, but in the sense that I was really exposed to what you would call like mental illness at an early age. My auntie Sharon, who is amazing, we had a nail date a few days ago. She has a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. And as a child, she was battling schizophrenia. And so I watched her at a very early age, I guess, responding to auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, but more so that really stood out to me was just how our community treated her and responded to her. And I asked my dad, like, why are people essentially like so mean to my aunt? He said, listen, like, your auntie loves you, but she has a mental illness, and not everybody understands her. And that, like, I was like 5 or 6, and I've never forgotten that moment. And so, because of that, I grew up more curious about like how the brain works, how society impacts how our brain works, how biologically we're impacted later in the space of our emotional wellness. So, already kind of like piqued my interest, just like academically wise. And then when I was going to college, I was still kind of figuring out what I wanted to do. I was still studying theater because I also love acting, but I also just needed that like what am I going to graduate doing at the same time? And I thought it was law, got an internship, and it just didn't feel like it was for me, even though love the idea of advocating for people, which is what drew me to the idea of that. But I had a pretty scary incident when I was just a freshman where this upperclassman on Halloween night was just under the influence of a lot of things. Well, I still don't know what those things were to this day. And he had gone around just like harassing different girls, I found out later, and had approached my friends and I in the common area. There were about four of us. We were just watching TV, and he had gone around to each of us, just like grabbing us inappropriately, saying inappropriate things. And I just watched all my friends freeze, these like vocal, really powerful girls. And I just felt so angry in that moment. And he approached me lastly, and I was like, no, you're not going to touch me. You're not going to put your hands on me. You shouldn't have even put your hands on my friends. And I just said no. And in that moment, although I felt empowered, I also felt really scared because then he became like irate, like
Mm.
verbally abusive, saying really horrible things, and then physically. Like at one point, he had me like pinned to a corner, and it was the scariest moment of my life. Like I was like that, like life flashes before your eyes kind of moment. It was like that, and I don't know what happened. I'm gonna say it was God, but like I was able to get out of that moment physically. I was trained in martial arts as a little girl. Never thought I would ever have to use it, but remembered everything in that moment. I was able to physically get him away from me, get him off of me fast enough and long enough for all the girls who heard the commotion to come out of their rooms and help me physically push this guy out of our dorm.
Wow.
And it was so, so scary. And I remember feeling like, okay, I'm okay physically, but emotionally I just wasn't. Like everyone knew me as that like bubbly girl, just like socializing everywhere, but I felt so timid and anxious in that moment. I felt uncomfortable around my guy friends who were the sweetest guys ever. And in that moment I was like, I have to get help. So I went to the school therapist. And that just felt so automatic for me. And that connects me back to that moment as a child of like having that early exposure to what mental health is and what support looks like, that I was able to get that help. And it was so healing for me. Like she kind of like helped put me back together essentially.
Hmm.
And I was like, wow, like all this from therapy, like I gotta do that. I want to help other women and other girls. And so that's what led me to becoming a therapist. And I wanted just to take that a step further and really just help women, which is also what drew me to pageants.
So then tell me a little bit about your platform and your mission throughout pageantry. And it also connects with what you do for a living.
Yeah. So my initiative is called Your Mind Matters Global. And I predominantly began to focus on women. And it was around the time of the Me Too movement. That was when I was going for Miss United States that following year, 2018. And I was feeling so proud of all the women coming forth, all the things that had happened to them. And I thought about myself in college where like it could have been so much worse, but I'm glad I was okay. But I was also thinking like, wow, therapy was so helpful for me that like what happened to all these women? Like, did they get the help that they needed? Was there someone in their corner being their biggest cheerleader, helping them to face those fears and to heal that trauma? And I was like, I've got to do that. So I started off doing my women's self-care workshops where I invited other women from different disciplines onto a speaking panel, women who were in the beauty industry, women who were in, various disciplines in the health industry, me covering the mental health side of things. I also invited female police officers to share tips about safety, just to one, like help women put words to their experiences, also to prevent, hopefully, harmful experiences from happening to them. And also like teaching them how to take care of their emotional well-being. Whether something bad happens or not, how do we take care of our well-being on a day-to-day basis? And it's been so fruitful. I've been able to do that all throughout DC since 2017. And then we've since gone from like meeting in tiny little libraries to we had one at Kendra Scott this past November in Georgetown. And it's been so amazing just like building these little communities. And I've done them like in different states, and it's just been so wonderful. And beyond that, I get to teach kids about mindfulness, going to different schools, doing like little mini summer camps and like teaching them about like breath work and meditation. And then every month I am joined by two other therapists, and we do free webinars that anyone can join for free covering different topics.
So outside of the experience you had in college, was there another defining moment in your life?
For sure. I actually I haven't thought about this moment in a while because it feels like it's such a big part of my identity and personality now. But I would say it was the summer after my freshman year in college where I went to Camp Hochelaga as a camp counselor, and it was an all-girls camp. And I like could cry thinking about it. That was so life-changing for me, and it was so healing in so many different ways, like more than I ever like imagined that it could be. So, you know, I would say I grew up pretty well adjusted, but I did struggle with ED,
Mhm.
anxiety, and bulimia throughout my adolescence and into early college. And that was the last moment in my life that I ever really struggled with like binging and purging. When I went to that camp, I was like, wow, like I am mentoring so many little girls, and these girls look up to me, they depend on me, and I want to do what I can to be my healthiest version for myself, but also so that I can be a healthy version for them. And it was that moment where, that summer, I would say, where just I went through my own emotional healing. We're in the middle of nowhere. I barely had cell service. We slept in like tents that just had like a wood platform and then just like the tarp over us. There was no electricity. I had bug nets on my bed, little lanterns just to go to the bathroom. Like it was like we were really out there, but I really connected with myself spiritually, emotionally, physically, and with all these little girls. That was just like, I really want to do something one day where I can be that role model. And that year I won Counselor of the Year. And I remember crying like I like won an Oscar. Like I was so moved. And I just felt that not only was I pouring into so many little girls, but there were so many other women pouring into me. And it was like, like when you hear like girl therapy, I think about that experience in my life. And I left that moment like inspired to wage change in my community. I felt so uplifted by the other women around me. And I was like, I know I've got to be someone for someone one day. And I think that also was what led me to pageants subconsciously.
So do you have any advice for people who they're struggling with something similar, whether it's a mental health issue, whether it's, I think anxiety and depression are so incredibly prevalent right now, especially post pandemic.
Yeah.
What's your advice to young girls or teens or young adults that might be struggling with that?
Yeah. Good question. I think what I see a lot is imposter syndrome around a lot of the people I get to work with, especially women. I think we as women, like, not to put down our men, but as women, I feel like we are just very innately empathetic. And maybe that's not innately. I think there is like nature versus nurture. I think like societally, we're allowed to be more of
Mm-hmm.
that and tap into that more. So I think that's also a big part of it. So because of that, we're always looking at someone else who just might have it worse. And sometimes it's hard for us to put the limelight on our own struggles and our own challenges. So I always tell, especially in my therapy sessions with clients, like put a name to what you're feeling, put a name to what you've been experiencing, even if it's the first time ever in your life, whether we're calling it anxiety, whether we're calling it trauma, depression, whether you don't know, we can just call it heartbreak. But at first, just put a name to it because that is what allows us to actually face what we're experiencing emotionally and help us to validate those emotional challenges. Because when we're doing so much space holding for other people, it takes us outside of ourselves, but putting names to what we're experiencing helps bring us back inward. So we can still be there for others, but also we learn how to be the advocate for ourselves too. And then definitely, if you don't know if you need a therapist, like go to someone who you're working with, whether it's your primary care doctor or another specialist in your life, and just ask the question, like, do you know how I can get started? Because someone like me is trained to kind of help you to like go and dive a little bit deeper and explore a little bit more to determine if, okay, is therapy the right move now? Or if not, like what are some things that I can do for myself or in conjunction with therapy, because therapy is only one resource, or your church. If you have any kind of, spiritual religious affiliation, like speaking to those leaders, because spirituality is such a big part of our mental health and well-being as well. And by just putting a name to it and just opening yourself up to support that can really bring you onto a really rewarding healing journey.
I'm a big advocate for, I think therapy is important. I don't know that everybody needs a therapist, but I think everybody has the right to choose if they need a therapist, and they need to look for someone who's going to connect with them and help them out. So whether it's a mentor, a therapist, you have somebody who helps to be, like you said, you're a cheerleader, that person who's going to be a champion alongside you. I ask everyone the same question. How do you define winning?
Hmm. And I love that question because I think it is subjective. Like we all define it for ourselves. I would say for me, this also goes back to childhood. When I was little, I was really hard on myself in school. And if I came home with a grade that I was just dissatisfied with, my dad would say, okay, do you feel like you did your best? Because if so, that is enough. So the answer was yes, it'd be great, you're a winner. And if I said no, he said, okay, well, what do you think you can do differently next time? So for me, I equate winning one with did I show up as my best self? Not perfect because I don't think
Mm-hmm.
perfection really exists, but like my best self in every area that I possibly could. Like for example, like I would say I'm not gonna say I'm not a morning person, but it doesn't always feel like the easiest to get up and do a workout. But when you're pageant training, like the physical training is a really big part of it as well, depending on like what system you're in, I should say. And so, did I hit snooze like, all pageant season, or did I actually get up and challenge myself? Did I spend a few extra moments like doing research on, my platform or the organization itself? Like, did I really utilize my time or was I like spending more time scrolling? So it's just like, was I as disciplined with myself as I possibly could have been? And if so, then it's like, well, great. There's nothing else that I could have done. Good for me. I went up there and I did a great job.
It sounds like you're talking about really making your time work for you instead of
Hmm.
wasting it. And I think
Yeah.
all too often we do waste our time. I probably did this morning, actually, if I'm being fair.
I mean,
But
you need that sometimes, like nothing wrong with it. But,
I think
I
a
think
little
when you're
bit.
working towards something, like I think time is like the most valuable aspect of like working, for something that you're passionate about or, working towards a goal of yours, I should say.
Well, and when it passes, you don't get it back.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not reusable, and
Yeah.
so we have to cherish it and hold it tight because we don't get another day. Like we
Hmm.
can't redo as much as we want to redo yesterday. Sometimes we don't get to. So I really want to know. I could pick your brain all day long about mental health. So I'm going to try really hard not to just do that the whole time. But I saw on your Instagram and where you mentioned ice and like ice packs and how it helps with anxiety. And I had another girl that I interviewed, Danica Christofferson, not too long ago, and she does ice baths like every single day. So, what is the deal with ice and anxiety? Why does that help?
Yeah, good question. Ice is just one tool out of probably thousands that help us ground. And what grounding means is that you are using your senses, all the senses that you have access to connect back to your physical body. When we're experiencing anxiety or a panic attack, we're kind of up here. We're up
Mm-hmm.
here in the brain, and there's a little bit of a mind and body disconnect that can happen. And so when we use something like ice, it kind of brings us back into our body. So ice specifically, if you put it in certain parts of your body, connects to your vagus nerve. And that is like the longest nerve that goes like from the top of your skull all the way down to the center of your body, down to your feet. And if you put that ice, whether it's behind your neck, behind your ears, or right here, like on your sternum, like your chest area, that directly targets that vagus nerve. And that vagus nerve, that's the relaxing part of our nervous system. So it triggers your body into a state of like calm and relaxation. So that's what the ice actually does. And aside from that, it also just it's a bit distracting, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm focused on like, did I get the job or not? Like I can't focus on that and how cold and
Right.
uncomfortable.
It automatically controls your mind for a
Exactly,
second.
literally. This ice pack feels or the ice bath or the cold shower, it literally brings my focus back to that. And so when we have a little bit of a distraction from that anxiety or that panic, we have a moment. We have a moment where we're no longer just totally anchored into that, where we can like, okay, I'm in my body, I can feel my body, what next? So it's also a
Mm-hmm.
good transitional moment for us. So whether we're going into breath work, to whether we are doing any other somatic exercise, somatic meaning like different movements that can help relax the body. We're doing those different things that can then continue to propel that like relaxation response to reduce that stress in that moment.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked that. That's
I
I love it. Tell
love talking about it.
I can tell you're so passionate about what you do. Did you once you started down this road of becoming a therapist, did you ever look back and go, "Wow, I kind of wish I would have done something else?" Or do you know that this is what your true calling is?
I don't feel like that because I do other things.
Well, you do a
I
lot of
think
things. That's so
I'm,
true.
yeah, I'm really fortunate where I have a job where my clients also know that I won Miss United States in 2018. When I competed last year for Miss DC, I said they all knew and were like wishing me good luck going into pageant weekend. They know if I have a modeling job because if I got to move our Friday appointment, they know I'm going to New York City to do that. So I feel very blessed and fortunate that I'm in a space where I'm able to continue to be the multifaceted person that I am. But I do know in my heart of hearts that this is also something I'm meant to do. I always say, like, if I were to win an Oscar one day and really get like that dream acting role, I'd still see my therapy clients. I would still
Mm-hmm.
maintain my caseload and do my best to serve them because that is a big part of, who I am as an individual, as I consider myself like called by God as a healer, is how I view myself. And that's a very cerebral part of my, I feel like I'm very like left-brained and right-brained, but I'm also a very creative person. So, both of those aspects definitely help complete the full package of who I am.
If if we can go back in time to Miss United States when you won, what do you think was the secret to your success?
You, Heather, it was you the whole time. Well, actually, no, I was looking at the questions and I really sat with like another defining moment. It was a conversation that you and I had during pageant week. I was in my room between rehearsals. We had a call and I was like, I am freaking
Hmm.
out. I'm anxious. I'm scared. I'm having imposter syndrome up the wazoo. Like I was going through it. And you asked me, you said Andromeda, like, let's fast forward, like close your eyes. Let's fast forward to let's say like a week after the pageant is over. You're home, it's done, you're eating your like that meal that you've been looking forward to. But now that it's done, if you could go back and change something, what would it be? And I was like, oh, I wish I would have just like enjoyed myself and just
Mm-hmm.
like had an amazing time and like bonded with these girls who I felt like so deathly afraid of in that moment. And you're like, well, then good, you still have time to do that. And I made the best friends ever from that pageant experience. Girls who I'm still in touch with to this day. And some of us are doing other pageant systems and we're cheering each other on. But like that moment brought me back to like what it's all about, which is just like enjoying the experience because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Even if I, were to do another pat, which I will be, but like that experience at Miss United States 2018, that's a once in a lifetime opportunity. That's like that moment. And I would never get that back. So I'm so glad that so early into my time there during the competition, I could go back and like have a shift and just like enjoy it, enjoy myself on stage, enjoy myself in the interview room, enjoy rehearsals, enjoy the girls, enjoy all the experiences that we had. And that really changed the game for me.
And it is the secret to success, right? In the pageant, if you're having fun, you're going to do better.
Yeah.
If you're not worried about results, you're going to do better. And you
Yeah.
do have the right to make friends.
I know. It's like this whole dance moms thing of no, like who's at the pyramid? It's like, no, like we're actually in this together. We really are.
Well, and at the end of the day, you're not competing against each other. And I think a lot of people have it wrong. They think, well, they're comparing us to each other. Who? Hopefully not you. If the judges are comparing, that's up to them. If they want to do the comparison game when they're figuring out who they want to win, that's the judge's prerogative if that's how they want to judge. But your job isn't to judge. That's what the judges are there for. So
Mhm.
don't do it for them. Like, have fun. It makes more
Yeah.
sense to enjoy it. So, has there ever been a time in your life where you've had to create like a solution to something in order to get what you needed? And you had to come up with a solution?
Yes. And I'm trying to think of where I want to go with this question. There's a few examples that come to mind. I guess I could focus on the mindset bit of that. I think I've never had a problem doing. If you say, "Hey, Andromeda, to win, do A, B, C, and D," I'll say, "Okay, I'll do that. No problem. I'll get up at 5 a.m. I'll, stay up till 3, like whatever it takes, like I will do that." It's almost like when I tell my clients or in my self-care panels, I'm like, "Hey, ladies, like, what have you done for self-care lately?" And they're like, "Oh, I did this and that." I'm like, "Well, how did you feel in the moment?" And they're like, "Well, what do you mean?" It's like we can do all the things, but if we're not present for those things, I'm not gonna say it doesn't count, but it's not as powerful or impactful as it could be if I could just be in that moment. So I think adjusting my mindset to match my actions has been the most helpful experience for me, not just in the pageant space, but even in like every professional space I've ever been in, whether it's, related to the mental health work or more of the creative side of things that I get to do. So I always tell myself whenever I do anything, if I'm faced with a challenge, it is okay to seek help. It's okay to accept the help. But I also have to be my biggest advocate internally too. It's not just taking the steps outside of me. So I go to my dad a lot, like for everything, honestly. And, if I'm like, any kind of dilemma that he walks me through. And we always come back to like, what are your thoughts in the process? What are you telling yourself about you
Mm.
and your ability to face that problem? So I think it's more of the formula that, to kind of answer your question, I think it's a formula that I follow now where it's does my internal match my external? And if not, how can I try to bring the two together and bridge that gap?
You mentioned earlier, and I have to jump back to it, that you had struggled with anxiety and an eating disorder when you were younger. Was there anything that led to the discovery of that for you? Is it something that you like fell into, or something that just happened over time, or something you can even talk about?
Yeah. I'll try to give you the cliff notes. It's a very long story, but thinking back, I would say that I've always wanted to be someone who's out there. I've always wanted to, whether it's model, before I knew what pageants were, I would have said I wanted to be on America's Next Top Model.
Mm-hmm.
I've always wanted to be that girl that people look up to. I love performing. I've been in theater since I was 10 years old and studied theater even into grad school. So that's always been such a big part of my identity. But at the same time, when I would look on TV or magazines back then. I'm a millennial, so we didn't have social media when I was in high school.
What a
Just
blessing.
Facebook.
Yeah. What a blessing.
Just Facebook. Um, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me at the time. And I thought, well, I've got to make up for that. I don't see a lot of women who identify as being, first of all, brown skinned girls. There weren't a lot, but also like being a Ghanaian American woman and an indigenous woman, definitely not a lot of that. So I was like, well, I've got to be different. I've got to be more like that. So I've got to be skinnier. I've got to be perfect. I've got to be all of these things to be worthy of an accomplishment, such as, being on the cover of Sports Illustrated Swim or, being an actress or a singer, all those things that I love to do, I thought I had to change to be good enough. That's exactly where it stemmed from. And then I would feel so much anxiety which I didn't know at the time I was doing, but thinking back, I was telling myself all day long, like, well, you don't look like that. You got to be better or different.
Mm-hmm.
And so after a while, like that's going to catch up with you. When we keep repeating a thought over and over again, it forms a neural pathway. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. And then eventually that becomes a core belief. So subconsciously, without my knowing, I was forming these core beliefs and then found pageants where I still hadn't, although I was, no longer, restricting, I was still telling myself very similar things of, well, you've got to look like that girl because she won last year and this and that. And so I found, working with you of like, well, that's not actually what goes into winning a pageant. You've got to be you,
Mm-hmm.
only you. And I think pageants for me, like, have actually been a really healing space for me because with modeling, for example, there's not a lot of women up there. Now we use platforms, we're on podcasts, but talking about the other side to this journey, you just see, you know, what we tell ourselves is ideal of perfection. But pageants, we have a voice too. We get to talk about our journeys and our experiences and use those journeys to hopefully like create something beautiful. And I think that I've taken those past experiences and created something beautiful, whether it be through Your Mind Matters or just telling my story in places like these where it's like, well, I am the representation now. I don't have to look outside of me. I've been the representation all along. It's just been me altogether, and I've always been good enough and I've always been worthy. And so it's that self-talk paired with the action of going for these big goals of mine that have been ultimately, I would say, like the conduits for tapping into more of this healing energy within me to fully accepting myself and being able to help other, especially girls, do the same thing these days. Do I still struggle with anxiety sometimes, but I know what to do now. I
Mm-hmm.
know to grab my essential oil or put it on my wrist. I know how to go into the breath work or tell myself, like, it's just a moment, it's going to pass. We all feel anxious sometimes, not the end of the world. And then, of course, it passes.
So if someone is listening to this and they're like, that all sounds great, but I can't control my anxiety or my mental health is at an all time low, where do they go for help if they can't afford help?
It's a good question. I think there are other resources in our lives within different communities. Even if you don't call yourself a therapist, you can still be someone of value to someone's life. So, for example, the pastor at my church, like we talk and he's like, oh yeah, like I helped a couple and he's not a therapist, but
Mm-hmm.
like he is providing a service to different members of the church. So if you belong to any kind of organization, like going to those leaders to receive that help. I think there's also some importance to looking online at their support groups as well. And some of those support groups are free of charge, whether it's a support group for anxiety or for ED or for depression, just Googling and finding some virtual support groups that if they do cost something, maybe it's not as much, maybe your
Mm-hmm.
insurance can reimburse that, or there are some that are free altogether. And also like find me on Instagram or social media. And I give free webinars all the time on different topics or share different tips. And I'm not the only one doing it. You like one post and it'll lead you to so many other creators on social media who are giving you different advice and feedback. And also, if there's a therapist who you connect with, like ask that therapist for other support too. Like Psychology Today is like I call it like the social media page for different providers, psychiatrists, and different therapists and counselors. And you can reach out, and if they, are not in your budget, they might be able to recommend somebody who is in your budget. Or maybe they can work with you on a sliding scale until you get better insurance or have a job that has insurance altogether. So it's not as straightforward, I would say, sometimes to finding that help, but I think it is worth the journey just by starting to ask those questions and getting led to one resource into another.
I find a lot of benefit in listening to audiobooks and podcasts and things like that too, which is
Yeah.
just beneficial. All right, if people want to follow you and find you, how they find you?
Yes, I'm on Instagram at Andromeda Peters, really easy. Also TikTok at Andromeda Peters, and my link tree is in the bio on both pages. So if you want to email me or get in touch, you can also reach out to me there, send me a message. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Well, I'm excited to see what's next for you. I know pageant's coming up. We're not going to say when, where, but so incredibly excited for you to continue your journey towards your dreams always. And I want to thank you so much for being here and for investing in so many wonderful lives through your incredible therapy gift that God has given you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and also for being such an important and blessing to my journey as well.
Oh, thank you.